Indian artists who had made a name for themselves internationally in the art scene and had art installations in the best known galleries worth millions of dollars come to blows. What followed was more than just a divorce drawn out in the public eye. Artistic passions turned to threats that turned to public fights and then murder. This is the story of Hema Hirani and Harish Bambani. Hi, welcome to Collectively Vigilant. I'm Dr. D. If you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe. And also, you can see this YouTube video actually as a whole different podcast, which I host with psychologist Sam. And if you want to check that out, that would be on Apple and Spotify, ready for you, because the same episode was actually released back on June 16, and it's episode number 23. So I will link it in the description box below. Now let's start with the story. Hema Upadhyay was actually not born as Hema Upadhyay. She was born as Hema Hirani to her parents Hasmukh Hirani and her mother Beena Hirani on May 8th of 1972 in Vadodara, Gujarat. Hema's mother Beena was actually a celebrated artist whose work had featured in the Mary H. Dana women's artistic series. Hema had an elder brother and yet another brother named Deepak. Hema took after her mother and was fond of art ever since she was a child. Even as a kid, she actually began by trying out different mediums. Her family saw so much potential in her work that they preserved every single sketchbook Hema had ever used ever since she was a kid. Hema went on to attend the convent of Jesus and Mary School. In addition to her mother's artistic influence, Vadodara, the city in itself where she was raised, had an immense influence on her artistic talents. You might not know this about Vadodara because I certainly didn't. That it was influenced, this is a city that has been influenced greatly by a rich cultural and artistic heritage. This is a critical city when it comes to India's artistic scenes because if you've ever laid your eyes on any picture of an Indian god, even if you don't practice Hinduism, you might have seen that around. Maybe you've seen it around on people's t shirts. You will see Indian gods all the time. Now, it's interesting that almost all of those gods and goddesses were single handedly produced by one artist whose name was Raja Ravi Varma. And Raja Ravi Varma, by the way, was invited to the city of Baroda in 1881 by Maharaja Sayaji Rao Gaikwad III, and Raja Ravi Varma produced most of his notable works in this particular landscape. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because Baroda used to be called Baroda, now it's actually called Vadodara, and that's where Hema grew up. She enrolled in the university, which best suited her artistic inclinations, so she graduated from the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda with a BFA degree in the year 1995 and then followed that up with an MFA degree in 1997 where she specialized in printmaking in her master's, and in her bachelor's she worked her main inclination was towards painting. The Maharaja Sayaji Rao University, by the way, where she graduated, let me tell you a little about it, because their Faculty of Fine Arts was established in the year 1950 and has been instrumental in India's contemporary art scene. Some notable alumna of this institution are very, very famous artists, including artists like N.S. Bendre, who's a pioneering person in the modernist art scene. Bendre actually co-founded the Baroda group of artists, which in which not only was he a significant figure, but other faculty members of the same university, like K.G. Subramaniam, Ratan Parimu, were also people who were very, very active in the art scene. And that's where Hema attended her bachelor's and finished her master's as well. Within the first few weeks of admission at the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda's Faculty of Fine Arts, she ends up meeting a fellow artist who was almost as prodigious as she is. She met a person by the name of Chintan Upadhyay. They started, of course, just like all love stories begin, by making googly eyes at each other. And then, before it was too long, they were constantly hanging out in the same group. And then, as you know what happens next, which is these two break away from that group and make a group of their own, also known as a relationship, also being a couple. So that's where their love blossomed. Now, who was this man, Chintan Upadhyay? Chintan Upadhyay, just like Hema Upadhyay, was actually born in the year 1972, but he was not born in Gujarat. He was born in Partapura in Rajasthan. Chintan was born on August 18 of 1972, and both Hema and Chintan has not only had their love for each other, of course, they had one really interesting thing in common, which is Hema's mom was an artist who encouraged her interest in art, and similarly, Chintan's dad was actually a formative influence of his life, because Chintan's dad is no one other than Vidhyasagar Upadhyay, who's very famous. He was an art professor at the Rajasthan School of Art in Jaipur and was the member of the Takman 28 group, Takman 28 group, which consists of experimental artists from Rajasthan. He introduced Chintan to abstract expressionism and significantly influenced his artistic inclinations. Chintan's dad, by the way, just like his son, also had a BFA and an MFA. He got his MFA from the University of Udaipur in 1970. Vidyasagar Upadhyay actually went on to get a PhD in painting, and the reason why I tell you this is because the year was 1996. So the son and the father, as the son was graduating from his master's degree, the father was actually completing his PhD, which is always nice when families can study together. So his father is, of course, as I told you, very illustrious, um, not only as a professor, but also as a formative influence on so many artists that have come out of the Rajasthan School of Art from Jaipur. Let's get back to the couple that I was talking about, Chintan and Hema. So, Chintan, the son of Vidyasagar Upadhyay and the love interest, received a BFA in 1995 and an MFA degree in 1997, and both his degrees were in painting. While he was at art school, Chintan won the prestigious Lalit Kala Academy Award not only in the year 1995 but also 1996 and 1997. It's an award that is bequeathed by India's National Academy of Fine Arts. Unlike most artists who might stick to a certain type of art, Chintan experimented a lot with mediums, and most of his work reflects on social issues. A year after both Hema and Chintan graduated with their MFAs, they got married and moved to Mumbai in the year 1998. By the time it was the year 2001, you remember what happened in India. It was a time of communal riots in Gujarat. So made in Chintan made himself into an art installation to protest against communal violence, and he made several still portraits, as did Hema. In 2003, Chintan and his cousins Lochan and Yatin Upadhyay started a rural art residency program. And as you can tell, immediately after graduation, the second they get married, they're both sort of threw themselves into work. Now, let me get into a little bit of what Hema was doing as I tell you what Chintan was doing. In the year 2001, Hema actually made her debut as an artist in Australia, and her installation, the famous one, uh, in from Australia, was called The Nymph and the Adult. In the same year, which was 2001, Hema bagged her the most prestigious Lalit Kala Academy award for being an artist, which her husband already had, as I told you. While Chintan was working on his rural residency, Hema and Chintan both, in fact, collaborated as artists as well. And they created an art installation which is really interesting. It was called Made in China. And this was basically their way of warning their country people, their countrymen, their countrywomen, that cheap goods which were flooding the market during the early 2000s in India was basically a waste and led to a lot of mass consumerism. So they made their art installation, which is called Made in China. Hema was, in fact, sent as an Indian ambassador for an art residency in Lahore, Pakistan, where she created her celebrated piece, which is called Loco Photo Moto. Then Beena and Hema, so Beena the mother, Hema the daughter, both together collaborated on an art exhibition in Chicago, and their work was displayed not only in Chicago but also in Milan. Meanwhile, Chintan was doing his own art residencies not only in India but all over the world. He did an art residency in Mexico, one in Germany, one in Taipei, one in London, one in Paris, and one in Hungary. As you can tell by this time, because they were in completely different parts of the world, though they were married, they were living very separate lives. They were constantly working on their own projects. Now, this doesn't mean that there are many marriages which will not survive being alone for or being separated for a certain time. But unfortunately, because they were spending so much time away from each other, that the cracks began to emerge in their marriage. By the time it was the year 2007, it was almost 10 years after getting married. One of Chintan's painting, interestingly, was sold for more than $500,000, uh, and other some of his other works had been auctioned by the world famous Christie's gallery. And his one of his works, after being sold for what is $529,000, which is more than $500,000, he also sold another art piece which was basically for $100,000 as well. By the time it was the year 2010, as you can tell, because these people were living such separate lives, as I said, that they had grown completely apart, and it was best for them that they would file for a divorce, as you can tell. And so they did. Chintan and Hema had filed for a divorce, which was actually interestingly based on cruelty. And Chintan was the one who actually filed this divorce, and under the clause of cruelty. Hema contested his claim, of course, and alleged that Chintan's petition for divorce based on cruelty was a strategic move, as his initial idea that he had proposed to Hema was they should both get a divorce with mutual consent. Apparently, Hema initially said no to that, and that's why he moved to file a divorce petition on the grounds of cruelty. Interestingly enough, despite initiating divorce work and divorce proceedings in the year 2010, they both continued to reside in their shared Mumbai apartment. That both of them, however, occupied different rooms in this apartment, and their divorce was finally basically finalized in the year 2014. So, like 4 long years. And despite their divorce, Chintan Upadhyay's father was once asked, "How is it going with your son's divorce and your daughter-in-law's divorce?" And he did remark that despite people who were basically divorcing, these were very loving people towards each other and were very cordial. One would wonder, why would it take 4 years to sort of file for a divorce? It's because in 2013, Hema actually accused, so they were not willing to budge, either of them. They wanted to keep, both of them wanted to keep that Mumbai apartment. Chintan was being more sort of commercially successful. Hema was being more sort of, some would argue, more artistically successful. So Hema accused Chintan of the year in the year 2013. Hema accused Chintan of harassment, alleging that he was painting obscene sketches all over the apartment walls. And in that particular case, Hema Hirani was actually represented by a lawyer by the name of Harish Bambani, uh, for her divorce proceedings and also for this obscene sketches in the apartment case. However, as you can imagine, Hema lost that case because it's their combined apartment and it's freedom of expression in your own house. So, no court is going to rain down on one person like a wall of bricks. Just because you choose to paint certain things in your apartment, your spouse might not like it, but it's freedom of expression. So, in 2013, she basically lost this particular court petition, as you can tell. Their divorce basically dragged on. Hema was also seeking maintenance from Chintan in this divorce proceeding to an amount totaling to 2 lakh rupees monthly. That's roughly $2,000. The court, however, sanctioned a reduced amount for Hema's maintenance, which came to about 40,000 rupees, which comes to around $400. Now, that's a significant decrease in what she was demanding and what the court actually gave her. Chintan, however, complied with these, payments, and there are reports which say that he did actually pay 200,000 rupees payment to Hema's lawyer, Harish Bambani. So, following all this divorce proceedings, it dragged on for 4 years, but they actually eventually got a divorce in 2014, and that's when Chintan relocated from Mumbai to Delhi, while Hema remained in that same apartment. And Chintan actually moved to this upscale location in Delhi, which is called New Friends Colony. Now, you would think that I keep going on and on about this couple and how they were initially in love and then how they fell out of love, but nothing's happened as yet. And this would not be a true crime podcast if there was not one or two murders involved. So, this is what happens next. Unfortunately, despite being able to get this divorce, rationality did not prevail. World is not always the most rational place. So a year after the court had granted their divorce decree in the year 2015, their finances were still a point of contention between Hema and Chintan, and Hema was still talking almost every day to her divorce attorney, Harish Bambani. And one morning, which was the morning of December 11 of 2015, Hema met up with her divorce attorney, Harish Bambani. By the way, let's go a little bit into whatever information I could gather about Harish Bambani. He was an established lawyer and he was the youngest sibling of his family. He lived in a multi generation home in Mumbai. Harish himself was, of course, a lawyer, but his elder brother was actually a pilot. um, the elder brother's name is Ramesh Bambani, and he was an Air India pilot. And there's another elder brother whose name is Gope, and I think, according to newspaper reports, he worked in government service. So Harish's wife, the lawyer's wife, was a homemaker, and she was raising two of their daughters while being at home. So, Hema's mother, Beena, and Harish's wife were trying to get in touch with both Hema and Harish on December 11 of 2015. Unfortunately, none of the calls were going through. So, Hema's mom, Beena Hirani, calls up the household help who would usually be at home at Hema's home, and he basically picked up the call and the domestic help. The phone, it seems, is switched off. He then together they all contact different relatives and friends just to see if anyone's heard from Harish, if anyone's heard from Hema. They were very, very worried because nobody could track these people down. So the following day, they register a complaint for a missing persons complaint, two missing persons complaint, and the lawyer's family, the Bambani family, also, of course, had the same problem, same complaint, that all the calls were either going to voicemail or the phone was completely switched off. So on this night, neither Hema returns home and neither does Harish return home. So the following day, as I said, the complaint had been lodged. And while the police was just thinking of doing some sort of action or doing something about this, because remember, this is a lawyer and a prominent artist, and they were sort of in the media eye when they were married. Chintan and Hema were in the public eye, so they were sort of known people. So the police was sort of acting, but before they could actually act any further, on Saturday around 7:30 p.m., a sweeper somewhere in Mumbai, sees and he notices that there are two giant sort of boxes floating floating near a crematorium in a open drain, and this was in the Kandivali area of Mumbai. He immediately alerts people around him, and he then, the sweeper itself, then alerts the police. And then the police comes, and the minute they see that rather large boxes, what they found next was the body of a person which was wrapped in sort of transparent polythene, sort of huge bags. And These bags had been stuffed inside two separate cardboard boxes. As you can tell, because you are audience of a true crime channel, these were the bodies of Hema Hirani and Harish Bambani. When they were found, they were wearing nothing except their undergarments. The bodies had not fully decomposed but were on the verge of decomposition, and the police was able to identify both of these victims because their faces were quite clear. And based on CCTV footage and call records, it was determined that at some point Hema and Harish had come all the way to meet Hema at her studio in Andheri, and then they left in Harish Bambani's car. And the last call that Harish Bambani had taken could be traced to around 8:30 p.m. in the Kandavali area. The police located the manufacturing details of the two cardboard boxes in which these bodies were found, and they interestingly found the place where they could triangulate that this was coming from a area which was near a fabrication shop where Hema would frequent this place quite a lot because she was an artist, as you know, and art installations, the kinds that she used to make, were humongous. So you need places to store those, and you also need specific contraptions which can help you with your art installations. These can be really giant things, as you know. So they located that perhaps these two people had visited that art fabricator's shop at some point. After analyzing the CCTV footage of some homes in that area, the police then apprehended a truck driver by the name of Vijay. Vijay informed the police that he was, in fact, the person who had dropped off those boxes into the open drain. But what he said was he had no idea what was inside those boxes. He was just told to drop off those boxes into the nearest dumping ground. And in this case, it was an open drain. The police furthered their investigation, and that's where, you remember the art fabricator's shop that I was telling you about, of course, had dealings with Hema. So it was revealed that Hema was had actually contracted a person called Vidyadhar to be her art fabricator, and she stored a lot of her art projects in his warehouse. And it was revealed that perhaps the same person also knew Chintan Upadhyay, because you remember there were also sort of financial disputes still going on between the couple despite getting a divorce. So on December 16 of 2015, there were two suspects who were narrowed down, and these two suspects were these two suspects were associated with Vidyadhar, the owner of the fabrication shop. And it seems like these people had run away from Mumbai and had run to a place in Uttar Pradesh, very famous, a place called Varanasi. And later on, they were arrested by a UP police special task force. Vidyadhar Rajbur is his name, by the way, the art fabricator, immediately becomes the prime suspect. However, despite efforts of the UP police and the task force, they were able to apprehend other people, but not really him, it seems. However, the special task force was able to intercept a man by the name of Shiv Kumar, who was on his way from Varanasi station to another really small village in UP called, called Gosaipur. And when they apprehended him, they actually recovered ATM cards, SIM cards, and other documents which belonged to Hema Hirani and Harish Bambani. And soon, this guy, Shivkumar, quickly confessed to the murders. Vidyadhar, however, the art fabricator, you remember, was still at large. The police was suspicious that these two were not really the mastermind, and they were, of course, trying to figure out if Chintan Upadhyay had anything to do with this whole fiasco of the death of two people, the murder of two people. The call records of Chintan's phone apparently show that before the murders of Hema Hirani and Harish Bambani. So the police was trying to narrow down if Chintan had any kind of sort of role in this whole thing, And the call records were quite a revelation. And it seems like Chintan was suspected of paying Vidyadhar to commit murder of Hema Hirani and Harish Bambani. In February of 2016, shortly after this revelation was made public that Chintan had a hand in the killing of these two people, a group of 61 artists demanded that. So, when people were petitioning that he should be released because there is no concrete evidence against him, as a matter of fact, Special Public Prosecutor Vaibhav Bagde told the media that he was seeking death punishment or the death penalty for victims Harish Bambani and Hema Hirani. He said that, and by the way, around this time, it seems like there was a lot of assault going on against sort of lawyers in Maharashtra, and the public prosecutor to the media says that this falls in the category of rare cases, and this has ramifications for the entire legal system because, of course, as you know, Harish Bambani was a lawyer, and he said that when he goes in the court, he would be asking the judge for the death penalty. The prosecution, over the next few months, prosecution examined 50 witnesses during the trial that began, and Chintan Upadhyay was named by the prosecution as the pioneer of the conspiracy to sort of murder Hema and Harish Bambani. And he said, the public prosecutor, he said, quote, Chintan was driven by hatred towards the duo, unquote. The prosecution then, in the court system, further on claimed that there was a chain of circumstances which proved that the accused, Chintan Upadhyay, was trying to eliminate his wife and also her lawyer. That's what the prosecutor said at that point, that that is something that he would be going for. However, it will be interesting for you to know, just like it's the hallmark of the Indian legal system, that cases don't actually go in front of the court for a long period of time. And Chintan actually spent 6 years in jail before he was granted bail by the Supreme Court of India in September of 2021. The police, it seems, was unable to crack this double murder, and um, they did have some evidence, but the defense of Chintan Upadhyay, his lawyers, were saying that yes, there were matrimonial disputes, but um, Chintan never hurt or never conspired to hurt Hema Hirani and her lawyer Harish Bambani. And they also, of course, being the lawyers of the defense, Chintan, they did say that he had absolutely no reason to eliminate his wife. And they also went on to say that the prosecution is claiming that they do have corroborating evidence from a witness whose name was Pradeep Rajbhar. And the defense says Pradeep Rajbhar had given this confession to the police under coercion. And then the defense also claimed that yes, it was a contentious divorce. However, the divorce had gone through, and these people were now living a separate life. And yes, there was some contentious thing about the finances as well, but that does not mean that Chintan Upadhyay had orchestrated this crime. That's what the defense said as they were petitioning to the Supreme Court of India to give Chintan Upadhyay his bail. After spending 6 years in custody and never actually going to trial for the killings of Hema Hirani and Harish Bambani, nonetheless, that was he was petitioning for a bail, and he was granted that bail. However, then the trial began, and then the trial basically, that the only news report I could get out of it about this case basically said that the trial culminated in October of 2023, and Chintan Upadhyay and the three other accused who had actually committed the murder, and they said that Chintan had masterminded the whole murder. Um, Basically, the other two were given life imprisonment, and as of September 9 of 2024, that was just a few months ago, Chintan Upadhyay is in fact out on bail because the court had given him a suspended sentence, it seems. So he's out on bail while the other two are serving their sentence. But they say that the abetment to criminal conspiracy that the prosecution has actually accused him of has not been completely proven in the courts, and that's why he's still out on jail. Does that out of jail? Does that mean that this man will be out of jail for the rest of his life? Unlikely. Maybe on some day, sometime in the future, he might be taken back, but as of now, he's out of the jail. So remember that he has not been acquitted, his conviction still stands. And the fact is that he's just out on bail. It does not mean that he's been cleared of all charges. If the higher courts reject his appeal of being out of jail forever, of course, he will someday will have to return to jail to serve his life sentence. So, what do we have in this case? We have two deaths in one case and a legacy which is strained, a legacy which is smeared with red, the color of blood. So, Hema Hirani, the woman who had turned her canvas into portals of emotion, was ultimately, it seems, stripped of her voice and her agency in her death. Harish Bambani, who had taken it upon himself to defend those people who had been silenced by society as a lawyer, was murdered just because he was collateral damage. The intention here seems to be financial and seems to be some sort of ego satisfaction if Chintan is in fact the person who has done this. Yes, he has been convicted, but somehow he's still out of jail. This reminds us that, even when there are shadows of sort of brilliance around someone, they have this aura of brilliance. There can always be this darkness which has taken root deep somewhere in this person. It seems that art and justice, beautiful as these concepts are, noble as they are not always immune to betrayal. They are not immune to rage, not immune to revenge. So, Chintan may be walking free as of now, but the ghosts of these two bodies who were found so brutally murdered inside cardboard boxes, who were also stripped of all their dignity because they were found in their undergarments only, haunt not only the courtrooms of India but also haunt the galleries where Chintan still displays his art. So how do we understand a crime like that? Okay, let's try to get into the criminological aspect of this crime. Legally, I told you that Chintan, of course, has been convicted of this crime. He is out on bail because he had already served a certain sentence in jail, that being 6 years. So, as of now, yes, he's out, but someday he might be taken back just in case the higher courts deem that he should be spending the rest of his life in prison. Okay, so that's the legal aspect of it. It's unfortunate that, people are set free, and the two who did not seem to mastermind it but executed the crime are actually serving their sentence in jails. But this is where money plays a really important role in every judicial system, and especially in the Indian legal system. Right. So that's the legal aspect of it. Now I'm going to move on to the criminological aspect. For the psychological aspect, of course, I am not a psychologist. That's going to be Sam's version of what happens in the minds of such people. And if you really want to know, you should tune into the podcast, which is available on Spotify and on Apple. And this is episode number 23 of Collectively Vigilant. Anyway, so let's get back into why would such a crime be done? Right. So, such a crime is, of course, perpetrated by people who think that this is a rational choice because it was financially motivated, right? To us, it might sound so stupid. Why would you go to such lengths to eliminate those two people? And especially the lawyer who's just collateral damage. Why would you even do that? Well, we could, if we apply criminological theory of rational choice, this is how it applies. It seems like Chintan had calculated the killing of Hema to eliminate his financial burden, to get rid of the alimony payments and the property disputes between these two. And then he doesn't want to get his hands dirty. Of course, that would not be the smartest thing for him, the celebrated artist that he was. So he hires contract killers, and rather than committing the crime himself, he just plans it and watches it from a distance. So rational choice, right? He's going to stay away from this. He also believed that there would be hardly any chance that he would be caught. Uh, the people who have actually done the crime with their own two hands would, of course, be caught. Probably he thought of this as his final solution for all the problems between Hema and himself, right? So, this is the rational choice, it seems, that he came up with. He did not want to pay the 40,000 rupees of monthly alimony. Um, so, it does reeks of smells of premeditation. Okay, so he basically ran a cost benefit analysis in his mind, and for him, this was the rational choice. You and I might not agree with that. Another thing which could, of course, explain a crime like this or a crime of this nature would be, of course, this man was going through some sort of strain, and that was brought on by financial pressure, which might have led to why he masterminded this crime. It applies here because it does seem like Chintan was frustrated because of his financial obligations, which were set by the court. So he did not want to pay for that. He felt like he was trapped, even though he had gotten a divorce. He was still trapped because he had the obligation to maintain her lifestyle, and rather than continuing to pay alimony, he basically resorted to a criminal means to remove his financial burden. Right, again, so I'm not a psychologist, but even in criminology there is an overlap between criminology and psychology, as you can imagine, of course. So there are several theories which say that if you have traits of psychopathy in your personality, you would lack empathy and you would always have control issues, and that's what one can allege that Chintan suffers from. He was controlling and manipulative in his relationship. He viewed Hema as an obstacle rather than a person, and he felt no remorse, it seems, because till date he refuses to acknowledge that he's done anything, although he's been convicted by the court but still out on bail. So he had done this purely for his financial and personal gains. And if you remember, Hema had accused Chintan of harassing her, and one of his manipulative ways of harassing her was also a freedom of expression thing that we had already discussed in the video, where he was, of course, putting sort of all sorts of obscene paintings all around their apartment. One Some of us would probably not view this as harassment. To her, it was distressing, so it was emotional harassment to her. It and time again in all her paperwork, she does allege that he continues to monitor her finances, and despite the legal separation, he was continuing to sort of harass her. Right. So that would be the criminological analysis of trying to understand why people like Chintan Upadhyay would commit the kind of murders that he has done, for which he's convicted for. Right, so that brings us to the end of the criminological and legal analysis of the killings of Hema Hirani and Harish Pambani. As I always say when I close these videos, and as we always say on the podcast, Sam and I both, we can give each other so much more than our thoughts and prayers. We can give each other our collective vigilance. So until I see you again, stay collectively vigilant.